I was a 34-year-old contractor from Portland who was exceptionally close to my grandfather William. The craftsman-style house he left me had been in our family for 80 years. I never imagined my own family would sue me claiming the inheritance was unfair. I never thought I'd see my own blood relatives try to take away the one thing my grandfather wanted me to have. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to join me for a story about family betrayal and justice. Growing up home wasn't really home. My father was an alcoholic who eventually abandoned our family when I was 7. Mom did her best working 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, but she was rarely around. That's why weekend visits to Grandpa William's house became my sanctuary from age 8. His craftsman-style house sat on a tree-lined street in an older part of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and welcoming, just like him. The moment I'd step through that front door, the weight of my troubled home life would lift from my shoulders. "Luther, my boy," he'd call out, his weathered face breaking into a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "I've been waiting for you. Got a project that needs your help." Those projects became the foundation of our relationship. William was a master carpenter who believed in teaching by doing. From age 9, he put tools in my hands and patiently showed me how to use them properly. First, simple repairs, then more complex ones. By 12, I could replace a leaking faucet. By 14, I was helping him rebuild the back deck. One of my most treasured memories is when I was 10, and Grandpa decided we should build a treehouse in the massive oak in his backyard. We spent every weekend that summer measuring, cutting, and assembling. When we finally finished, he let me spend the night in it, bringing up hot chocolate and telling me stories of when he was a boy. "This house," he told me that night, "it's more than wood and nails, Luther. It's memories. It's family. Someday you'll understand what that truly means." When I was 16, we embarked on an even bigger project, restoring an old 1965 Ford truck that had been sitting in his garage for years. We worked side by side, replacing parts, sanding down rust, rewiring the electrical system. The day we got it running, the pride in his eyes meant everything to me. That truck later became my first vehicle. Life went on. I started community college studying business because that seemed practical, though my heart wasn't in it. Then everything changed when Grandpa William suffered a severe stroke when I was 22. The doctors were amazed he survived, but he lost mobility on his right side, the same side he'd always used for his carpentry. There was talk among the family about putting him in a nursing home. My Aunt Susan, his daughter, argued it was for the best. Uncle Robert, his son, agreed, but I couldn't bear the thought of William being forced out of the home he'd lived in for over 50 years. "I'll take care of him," I announced at the family meeting. "I'll move into the basement apartment." Aunt Susan raised her eyebrows. "And what about your education?" "I'll put it on hold," I said firmly. "This is more important." I dropped out of college that week, found a contractor job nearby specifically so I could remain close to the house. The basement apartment had been a rental unit years earlier with its own small kitchen and bathroom. It wasn't much, but it allowed me to be there for Grandpa while still giving us both some privacy. Our new routine developed naturally. Every morning, we'd have coffee together on the front porch, discussing projects around the house. Though his right hand no longer worked properly, his mind remained sharp. He'd direct, while I'd do the physical work maintaining the house he loved. For 12 years, I handled everything: property taxes, utility bills, roof repairs, plumbing issues, yard work, all while working full-time as a contractor. I never complained because I was simply returning the care he'd always shown me. Meanwhile, the rest of the family visited only on holidays, if that. Aunt Susan lived just 30 minutes away, but would only come by for Christmas, and Thanksgiving, usually staying less than 2 hours. Uncle Robert lived across the country and visited maybe once a year. My cousins Mark and Tiffany, both in their 30s, were too busy with their own lives to bother with their aging grandfather. There was one evening, about 7 years into our arrangement, when William and I were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. He reached over with his good hand and patted mine. "You saved me, Luther," he said quietly. "After your grandmother passed, I thought I'd die of loneliness. Then you came to live with me, and you brought life back into this old house." I swallowed hard, embarrassed by the emotion in his voice. "You saved me first, Grandpa. All those years when I was a kid." He nodded understanding, what I couldn't fully express about my childhood. As the years passed, I had opportunities to move on, including a lucrative job offer in Seattle that would have doubled my income. I turned it down without hesitation. My place was with my grandfather in the house that had become my true home. As William entered his late 80s, his health began to deteriorate beyond just the mobility issues from his stroke. He developed congestive heart failure, then kidney problems. The last year was the hardest. I converted the dining room into a bedroom so he wouldn't have to navigate the stairs, and eventually we needed hospice care. I took unpaid leave from work to provide 24/7 care during his final months. Those days were both precious and painful. We'd talk for hours when he had the strength about everything from carpentry techniques to his childhood during the Great Depression. When he couldn't talk, I'd read to him or just sit beside him, my hand on his. It was during this time that Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert suddenly became more frequent visitors. They'd show up unannounced, talking in hushed tones about family assets and asking seemingly innocent questions about the house. "Has Dad ever discussed what will happen to the house?" Susan asked me one day in the kitchen while William was sleeping. "We don't talk about that," I said firmly. "We talk about living, not dying." She exchanged a look with Robert that made me uneasy, but I was too focused on William's care to worry about it. William passed peacefully on a Tuesday morning in October. He was 88 years old. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, thanking him for everything he'd taught me. The funeral was small but dignified. I organized and paid for everything, wanting to honor him properly. I chose the mahogany casket because of his love for fine woodwork. Selected hymns I knew he'd appreciated. Wrote the obituary myself, detailing his skills as a craftsman and his character as a man. 1 week after the funeral, we all gathered at the family attorney's office for the reading of the will. There were 7 of us: me, Aunt Susan, and Uncle Robert, my cousins Mark and Tiffany, and 2 of William's younger friends from his church. Mr. Patterson, the attorney, was a thin man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He cleared his throat before beginning. "William Harrison Caldwell, being of sound mind, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament," he read formally. There were standard bequests: his tools to be divided between me and his church's carpentry ministry, small sums of money to his friends, family photographs and albums to be shared equally. Then came the part about the house. To my grandson Luther, who has been more of a son to me than anyone, I leave my home and property in recognition of his unwavering care and love. Mr. Patterson read, looking at me over his glasses. Luther didn't just visit me when convenient. He built his life around ensuring my comfort and dignity. This house is already as much his as it is mine. The silence in the room was deafening. I felt all eyes on me, but I kept my gaze on my hands, a mix of grief and gratitude washing over me. "Well," Susan finally said with a tight smile, "congratulations, Luther." "Yes, congratulations," Robert echoed, but his eyes were cold. As we left the attorney's office, I overheard Susan and Robert talking in the parking lot. "This isn't right," Susan was saying. "Dad wasn't thinking clearly. Luther obviously manipulated him." "We'll discuss options," Robert replied, his voice too low for me to hear more. That evening, I hosted a small family dinner at the house, thinking it might ease tensions. I'd spent hours cooking William's favorite pot roast recipe, but the atmosphere was strained. Susan made passive-aggressive comments about family traditions and fair shares. Robert kept appraising the furniture with his eyes, as if calculating values. "Look," I said, trying to be conciliatory, "I know you all might have expected different arrangements." If there are sentimental items in the house you'd like to have, please just let me know. I'm happy to. That's very generous of you, Susan. Cut me off to offer us pieces of our family home. They left early, barely touching their food. After they'd gone, I sat in William's favorite chair, reading through old birthday cards he'd given me over the years. Each one signed with pride and love, Grandpa. The house felt emptier than it ever had, even after he was gone. For the next 3 weeks, the texts and calls started. At first they were subtle. Luther, I was thinking about Dad's military service medals. I feel they should go to Robert, since he served in the Army too. This from Susan. Hey, 'cause when are you putting the house on the market? I know a great realtor. This from Mark, who had visited his grandfather maybe 5 times in the past decade. Then they became more pointed. It's unfair that you're hoarding the family legacy, Susan texted one Wednesday morning. Everyone knows you took advantage of a sick old man, came from a number I didn't recognize, but was probably one of Robert's friends. I tried to respond with patience, explaining that I was simply honoring William's wishes, that the house had been my home too for 12 years, that I had put my own life on hold to care for him. The turning point came when I returned from work one day to find Susan's car in the driveway. I walked in to discover her and Robert in William's study, going through his desk drawers. "What are you doing?" I demanded. Shocked to find them in the house without my permission. Susan barely looked up, just collecting some of Mom's letters that Dad kept. Family history. And the spare key under the plant pot still works convenient, Robert added with a shrug. But something felt wrong. After they left, I discovered William's collection of vintage watches was missing from his dresser. When I called Susan about it, she became defensive. Dad would have wanted me to have those. Mom gave them to him after all. I was just collecting what she would have wanted me to have. That night, I changed all the locks and installed security cameras. The sense of violation was overwhelming. These were people I'd shared holiday meals with for years, and now they were essentially breaking into my home. 6 weeks after the funeral, a certified letter arrived. My family was formally contesting the will, claiming William was not of sound mind when he wrote it, and demanding the house be sold with proceeds split equally among all family members. I sat at the kitchen table, the legal document, in my trembling hands, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Not only were they trying to take away the home I'd helped maintain for over a decade, but they were disrespecting William's clear wishes and besmirching his mental capacity. The next day, I met with James Bennett, an attorney specializing in estate litigation. His office was small but neatly kept, with diplomas covering one wall. They don't have much of a case, he assured me after reviewing the documents. Your grandfather had his will professionally updated just last year, and the attorney made sure to document his mental competency. Plus, there's your 12 years of residence and caretaking. But they're saying I manipulated him. I said, the words still bitter on my tongue. Family will contests often get ugly, James said gently. Be prepared for that. This isn't really about the house, you know. It's about money and possibly jealousy over your relationship with your grandfather. The financial reality hit hard. Legal fees would stretch my savings thin, especially after the months of unpaid leave I'd taken for William's care. I picked up weekend work renovating bathrooms to make ends meet. One evening, while organizing William's papers, I found his journals. For years he'd kept detailed accounts of his daily life. The entries from the past decade were filled with mentions of our projects together, his gratitude for my care, and clear statements about wanting me to have the house. Luther replaced the water heater today, read one entry from 3 years ago. Saved us $500 doing it himself. This house is already his in every way that matters. Need to make sure the will is clear about that. Finding these journals felt like hearing his voice again, giving me strength to face what was coming. But the emotional toll was still heavy. Walking through rooms filled with family photos now felt like navigating a minefield of betrayal. The smiling faces in those frames had become strangers to me. As the court date approached, the legal battle intensified. My family hired Gregory Wilson, an attorney known for aggressively contesting wills. His reputation was for overwhelming opponents with paperwork and intimidation. Anonymous calls came in the night, sometimes just silence, sometimes veiled threats about family dirt that could be exposed. I knew it was likely my cousins, trying to pressure me into settling. The stress began affecting my health. I lost 15 pounds, developed insomnia, and started getting tension headaches. My boss noticed my deteriorating condition and encouraged me to take time off, but I couldn't afford to miss work with mounting legal bills. In this dark time, unexpected support emerged. My co-workers took up a collection to help with my legal expenses. William's neighbor Alice, an elderly woman who had known him for decades, reached out offering to testify about his mental clarity and our close relationship. Even some of my clients delayed projects so I could focus on the court case. 2 weeks before the trial, I received a settlement offer through my attorney. The terms were insulting. I could keep the basement apartment if I agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds. They were offering me the servants' quarters of my own home. Tell them no, I instructed James firmly. This is not about money for me. The rejection led to even more aggressive tactics. I learned from William's doctor that family members had approached him, seeking statements about my grandfather's mental decline. Fortunately, the doctor had refused, citing both medical ethics and the fact that William had remained mentally sharp despite his physical limitations. The day before the court date, I was organizing William's remaining papers when I found something extraordinary: a sealed envelope addressed to my family to be opened in case of disputes. The letter inside was dated just 3 months before his death, written in his shaky, left-handed script. After reading it, I called James immediately. "We need to bring this to court tomorrow." That night, I barely slept. I sat in William's workshop in the garage, surrounded by the tools we'd used together over the years. The air still smelled faintly of sawdust and varnish. I ran my fingers over the workbench we'd built, remembering his patient instructions. "Am I doing the right thing, Grandpa?" I whispered into the quiet space. No answer came, of course, but sitting there among the physical evidence of our bond, I found my resolve strengthening. This wasn't just about a house. It was about honoring a relationship and a man's clear wishes for what he'd worked his whole life to build. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. I sat at one table with James, while across the aisle, my family clustered around Gregory Wilson, occasionally glancing my way, with expressions ranging from anger to feigned pity. Judge Howard Mercer presided, an older man with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency. He reviewed the case briefly before opening proceedings. Susan was the first to testify, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue as she spoke. "My father was very confused in his final years," she claimed. "After his stroke, he wasn't the same. Luther took advantage of that, isolating him from the rest of us. Whenever we'd visit, Luther was always there monitoring our conversations." I clenched my jaw, remembering how those visits had been rare 30-minute appearances, usually around holidays. Robert followed with his own fabrications. I offered multiple times to help care for Dad, but Luther always said he had everything handled. Now I realize he was deliberately keeping us away to influence Dad's decisions about the estate. Their attorney painted me as a calculating manipulator who had wormed my way into an elderly man's confidence for financial gain. I felt physically ill listening to their characterization of the relationship that had defined and saved my life. When my turn came, I spoke honestly about the years of care, the maintenance of the house, and most importantly, the bond William and I had shared. "I never once discussed inheritance with my grandfather," I testified. "Our conversations were about living, about projects around the house, about his memories, and the skills he wanted to pass on to me. I would have cared for him regardless of any inheritance." James presented William's journals as evidence, pointing to entries spanning years that clearly indicated his intention for me to have the house. He also called William's doctor, who testified about his mental competence until very near the end. In my professional opinion, Dr. Levine stated, William Caldwell remained mentally sharp and decisive despite his physical limitations. He frequently discussed his grandson's care with gratitude and clarity. Alice, the neighbor, provided perhaps the most impactful testimony about daily life at our house. "I've lived next door for 30 years, she said in her wavering voice. Before Luther moved in, William was declining rapidly after his wife passed. After Luther came, William had a new lease on life. Those two were inseparable, always working on some project, laughing together on the porch. The rest of the family, I barely saw them, except when they'd rush in for an hour at Christmas." Throughout their testimony, Gregory Wilson conducted aggressive cross-examinations, trying to twist words and imply ulterior motives. But their attacks seemed to be losing steam in the face of consistent evidence about William's mental clarity and our genuine relationship. The decisive moment came when James presented William's sealed letter to the judge. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit this letter written by William Caldwell 3 months before his passing, explicitly addressing the current situation." Judge Mercer examined the envelope, noting the date and William's signature. After confirming its authenticity, he began reading it aloud. "If you are reading this, it means my family has contested my decision to leave my home to Luther." The courtroom fell silent. Even Susan stopped her performative sniffling. What they fail to understand is that while they saw a house with financial value, Luther saw a home with a soul that needed care. He didn't inherit this house today. He earned it one day at a time, one repair at a time, one act of love at a time, while others were absent. I watched my family's faces as the judge continued reading William's direct, unambiguous words. "To Susan and Robert, my beloved children, I love you, but your visits became obligations rather than connections. You came to check if I was still alive, not to be part of my life. Luther came and stayed. He built his world around ensuring mine remained intact." Susan's face flushed red. Robert stared at the floor. "The true inheritance I leave isn't wood and plaster, but the values of commitment, loyalty, and care that Luther exemplifies. If you contest this, will you prove you've missed the most important lesson I tried to teach, that family is defined by actions, not merely blood?" Judge Mercer looked up from the letter, his expression unreadable. He studied each of us carefully before setting the letter down. "This court finds not only that William Caldwell was of sound mind when creating his will, but that his decision reflects a recognition of true family bonds that are formed through actions, not merely blood. The will stands as written, with the property transferring fully to Luther Caldwell." Furthermore, he added, looking directly at my family, "The court admonishes the plaintiffs for wasting judicial resources on a case that appears motivated by financial interest rather than genuine concern for the deceased's wishes." The finality in his voice rang through the courtroom. Susan's mouth opened in shock. Robert's face hardened into a mask of anger. My cousins looked away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I felt no triumph, only a profound sense of relief, mixed with lingering sadness that it had come to this, that William's final words to his children had to be read in a courtroom rather than received with love and understanding. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt both lighter and heavier. The legal burden had been lifted, but the weight of permanent family fracture settled in its place. My family hurried past me without a word, avoiding eye contact as they rushed to their cars. A local reporter approached, asking for comment on the case. I simply shook my head and kept walking. This wasn't a victory to celebrate or publicize. It was the painful end of what family had meant to me for most of my life. The house was achingly quiet when I returned. I walked through each room, touching the furniture William and I had repaired together, looking at the walls we had painted, the floors we had refinished. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully feel the grief of his loss without the distraction of the legal battle. Over the following days, I began the process of reclaiming the house emotionally. I repainted the dining room, returning it to its original purpose, now that the hospital bed was gone. I sorted through William's clothes, donating most, but keeping his favorite flannel shirt and the cardigan he used to wear on the porch during cool evenings. A week after the trial, I received an unexpected text from my cousin Tiffany. "I'm sorry about everything. Mom and Dad pressured us all to present a united front. Grandpa would have wanted you to have the house. I miss him too." I read the message several times before responding. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. The door is always open if you want to visit. No pressure." It was a small opening, a tiny bridge across the chasm that had formed in our family. I didn't expect much to come of it, but it felt important to leave that possibility open. The healing process continued as I threw myself into projects around the house. I finished the bathroom renovation William and I had planned before his health declined. I restored his collection of hand planes, hanging them on the workshop wall as a tribute to his craftsmanship. Using William's tools and the skills he had taught me, I started crafting custom furniture in the garage workshop on weekends. The familiar motions of measuring, cutting, sanding, and finishing connected me to him. Each piece I completed felt like a conversation we were still having. Through this work, I met Andrea, an interior designer who commissioned a custom dining table for a client. She appreciated the story behind my craftsmanship and the history of the house. On our third date, I showed her William's workshop, and the way she ran her fingers reverently over his tools told me she understood what they represented. "He's still here," she said simply, "in everything you make." 6 months after the trial, I had an awkward encounter with Aunt Susan at the grocery store. She pretended not to see me at first, then approached hesitantly near the checkout. "The house looks good," she said stiffly. "I drive by sometimes." "You've kept up the yard like Dad would have wanted." I nodded, unsure what to say. "I need some work done on my porch," she continued. "The steps are rotting." I thought, maybe. "I can recommend someone." I offered, understanding. She was attempting some kind of reconciliation, however self-interested. "That would be helpful," she replied, then hesitated before adding, "Dad taught you well." It wasn't an apology, but it was a small acknowledgement of the bond William and I had shared. I accepted it for what it was, neither holding on to resentment nor opening myself to further hurt. On the 1-year anniversary of William's passing, I hosted a small gathering at the house. Not for family who were still largely estranged, but for the people who had supported me through everything. Co-workers, William's old friends, my new friends from the local woodworking guild, and Andrea. We sat on the porch William had built, and I had maintained, sharing memories and raising glasses in his honor. The house felt alive again, filled with laughter and genuine connections. Looking around at these people who had chosen to be in my life, I realized William had been right all along. Family isn't defined by blood, but by the consistent choice to show up for each other. My grandfather's greatest gift wasn't the house itself, but this understanding and the example he had set. I eventually created a living trust, ensuring that whenever my time comes, the house will go to someone who will love it as we did, whether that's children of my own someday, or perhaps a young person with carpentry dreams who needs the same kind of mentorship William gave me. The legal battle faded into the past, but the lesson remains vibrant in my daily life. True inheritance isn't what's handed to you, but what you build with your own hands and heart. Every day in this house, surrounded by the evidence of William's care and my continuation of it, I feel a sense of peace and rightness that no court could ever grant or take away. Have you ever had to stand up for what was rightfully yours, or experienced a family conflict over something that held deep meaning to you? Share your story in the comments below. If you found value in my experience, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about family legacy and standing firm for what's right. Thank you for listening, and remember that Sometimes our greatest strength comes from honoring the people who believed in us when no one else did.